From 1982, that was Peter Godwin with Images of Heaven. Now, aside from Peter's solo career and his early work with the band Metro from the late 70s, Peter is back with a brand new project called Nuevo. And rather than start from the very beginning and then work our way forwards, let's start with Nuevo, the new album, Sunset Rise. What can you tell us about it?
Well, Nuevo is basically it's a two-hander. It's myself and a guy called Johnson Somerset. Mm-hmm. And Johnson is, he's a musician, but he's also very much a producer. He's just produced the new Brian Ferry album, Olympia.
Oh, excellent album.
Yeah, a very good album. I think a great return to form, I would say, actually. With a lot of original material rather than being dominated by covers, you know? Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's Johnson's kind of co-production on that. And he's also worked with Steve Winwood, quite a different artist. That was a project that actually he brought me into. I actually co-wrote all the songs on the last Steve Winwood album, 9 Lives.
Right, excellent.
Which you might have heard, I don't know. It actually did well in America, got to number 12 in the charts there. And not only that, but it had Mr. Eric Clapton on guitar on the single, Dirty City, and that got loads of rock radio play, you know.
Well, let me ask you, Steve Winwood, I think, is more successful in America than he is in the UK. Am I correct in that?
It's hard to say. I mean, he's well loved and well thought of here, no question. I mean, He's a legend, really, going all the way back to Give Me Some Loving and
Spencer Davis
I'm a Man
Group,
and Spencer Davis Group, the 60s, you know, right through so many things. And then, of course, he's got, I think his 80s career is what really kicked off for him as far as I know, in America.
Right.
And, of course, that, you know, having number one albums, I think songs like Roll With It, in the late 80s.
And Higher Love.
Higher Love, they were huge songs for him. I think the last album he had actually that did as well as 9 Lives was in the 80s.
Right.
So, you know, this new album that I co-wrote with him was, you know, like a kind of a big success for him in America, really. And going back to Nuevo and Johnson, I mean, Johnson and I had met, as often happens in the music business. We met at a gig. Mm-hmm. It was, it's a long story, but the short version is that it was a mutual friend. He was doing the guy's demos, literally like a 16-year-old with his band, and I actually knew the guy's mother and was there for that reason, had been following. It was a great little band. And now, in fact, Ollie Thompson, that guitar player who had a band at the time, is Brian Ferry's regular guitar player, and he's all over Olympia. He's the most charismatic sound you'll hear. Well, I'm there at this gig, and I get introduced to Johnson, and I'm introduced by my full name, at which point Johnson says, not the Peter Godwin, which...
well, that's good.
Which is great, but it's, you know, to be honest, it's not something that happens to me every day. You know, it's not like the Paul McCartney. Right. No, I don't quite live that in that heady world. But it turned out that Johnson was a fan of Correspondence era, you know, Images of Heaven era Peter Godwin. And not only that, but his close friend, when he was a teenager, was playing on Correspondence. So, you know, it was all one of these strange entangled stories. And literally Johnson said, let's do something together. And I thought, why not? Let's look into it and let's see what we can do. This was before I really knew much about Johnson, and then I found that he'd actually worked on Mamounia, that Ferry album.
Right.
He'd done About Time with Steve Winwood, but also he'd done a whole world of remixes for everybody from George Michael to, well, more recently, he's actually been doing Katy Perry.
Oh, really?
He's just done 3 Katy Perry remixes, which are really radical for her. They're really edgy.
Right.
And she loves them. And, you know, E.T. was the last remix he did, and that was on sale. You know, when E.T. was number one of the mixes you could buy was Johnson's. So, you know, he's been very much coming from a dance world, and even though he's a great lover of all sorts of music, and we just found so much common ground. And we just leapt in there and we put together this new project and decided to call it a name and called it Nuevo, decided to do it like a band. There's also a singer on there that we brought in and put a lot of beautiful sort of sound textures, really, using the voice quite, not just for regular backups, but for choirs and different unusual things. You have to hear it. Amanda Sierra is her name, and wonderful singer, now studying opera in Rome. But don't let that deceive you. I mean, she's a very soulful sort of soul singer as well.
Right.
And she's all over the album. She is a presence. We brought her in on. She's on about 7 of the tracks, of the 10 tracks. So she's part of the character of that as well. And that, again, was just a friend of a friend. She heard the stuff when it was in a rough mix mode and liked it and wanted to meet and hadn't done a lot, really. And as soon as I heard her voice, I thought, she's interesting. And she actually does a duet called Milonga Moon on the album with me, which is something that a strange French-Spanish duet that kind of grew up, started off as a French song and then turned into this duet and brought her into it. That's really sort of gives you a bit of a picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's essentially, I'm writing these melodies and lyrics in the way I always have, but this time with the inspiration of a kind of soundscape and groove that I got from Johnson, and most of the tracks were done that way. I'd have this kind of sound fabric, and then I'd write over the top, but if you took the song away afterwards, you could play it on an acoustic guitar. It's still a song.
Right.
So although they have dance grooves and half the album is quite chilled out and the other half is more upbeat, but they're not conventional dance music, and there's far too many lyrics and things,
Right.
too many poetics on there. It's really me doing what I've done since I began with Metro all those years ago with Criminal World, which... as you probably know, got covered by David Bowie on Let's Dance. And I was always trying to do the same thing, and in a weird way, Nuevo really isn't that different. The personnel are different. There's some new and lovely chemistry there, but I've always tried to do original music, with a unique voice.
Let me ask you about that, because I'm a huge David Bowie fan. Unfortunately, Bowie, I think, seems to have retired. I don't think he hasn't made any music or movies for that matter.
That's true.
In about,
it's been quiet, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's about 7 or 8 years since he's done it. You never really see him do anything these days. But how did you find out that he was going to record that song? Did he get in contact with your publisher, or you?
No, it was actually quite unexpected, the whole thing. I met David Bowie once, although I doubt whether he'd remember it, but I met him at a very famous nightclub in London called the Embassy. Mm-hmm. I met him round about the time, actually, that the Metro album was about to be released. I met him with Bianca Jagger, who I happened to know at the time.
Right.
And so she introduced me to David Bowie. But it was literally, hi, this is Peter, this is David. And a couple of words after that,
Right.
But I didn't really know him. He didn't really know me. I was walking down the street in 1983, and Rusty Egan from Visage and a famous DJ of the Blitz bumped into me and said, "Hey, you're lucky, aren't you? Song on a David Bowie album. How'd you manage that?" and I thought he was joking, because he had a bit of a dry sense of humor and still does. And I thought, yeah, of course, And anyway, it turned out that he'd read it in the Melody Maker, a music paper.
Oh, okay.
And sure enough, that's where I read it. That it was talking about the up-and-coming tracks, and he'd done a version of China Girl, the song he'd done previously with Iggy. And he'd done a Metro song, Criminal World. Now, I actually heard a radio interview, not unlike this one, with a really well-known English DJ, Radio 1 DJ, one of the big national stations, Kit Jensen, interview with David Bowie talking about Let's Dance album, and he asked him about Criminal World, and I've actually got it somewhere on a piece of cassette, He said, so I've got the evidence, and he said actually that he bought the album, as, Bowie was well known for, keeping his ear to other music.
Oh, sure.
Bought the album, and he actually said that he liked a lot of the songs on it, and he thought about doing several of them, but that was the one he chose. That's what he said.
Wow.
And he didn't have to ask my permission because, as you probably know, once somebody's either granted the permission or you've done it yourself as the writer, hundreds of people, anyone can do a song.
Right.
They can cover a song as long as they account the royalties. So he didn't have to get in touch with me, and it was a very nice surprise, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, and not only that, it happened to be on, the David Bowie album that went mega in 1983.
It was his biggest at the
Sure.
time. It was definitely his biggest ever album. And what was interesting to me was the timing of it was such that at that period in musical history, so many acts that were around, including friends of mine and acts that were coming out of here and breaking in America, and Billy Idol and Ultravox and Simple Minds and all these acts and people, a lot of them that were personal friends of mine, they all had such a high regard for David Bowie, as did I, of course.
Sure.
And, it was almost like, the whole new romantic movement sprang out of one club that did something called Bowie Nights, this Blitz Club.
Right.
And they were dedicated to David Bowie and music they considered related to that and derived from that in some way. In fact, Metro, my first band, was played at Bowie Nights. A couple of tracks, Rusty the DJ, who later became the drummer with Visage and created Visage with Steve Strange. Rusty used to play The Mystery in America in my head at those Bowie Nights. And so when I got this ultimate accolade of Bowie doing one of my songs, everybody you can imagine was, in the nicest possible way,
Right.
was quite sort of envious, I guess would be the word, Because it was such a huge compliment and everybody liked him. And he had, let's face it, he'd just done 11 years or something of staggeringly original and groundbreaking albums, and material, yeah. But, generally, it wasn't that he was always doing covers. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
It wasn't a regular feature. That's why, again, it's quite a special thing, really.
Yeah, that's rarefied air around you, Peter.
Heady,
It really is.
heady up there.
Yes.
This is a world dynamic. This is the